Good morning, Bulldog fans. I'm Reese Calhoun,
Isaiah Kennard.
And Briar Haggerty.
and we are joined by the Honorable
Judge Lang.
So we have a few questions for you.
Sure.
First of all, thank you for being on the show. It's a
Yeah.
pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
What made you go into like this career? Like, what made you want to be a judge?
Well, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer from a pretty young age, and apparently, actually, from the time I was 5, I used to say that I wanted to be a judge. At that time, I don't think I really understood what the job was, but I think in my mind, as like a little kid, I thought that when people were fighting or having arguments or disputes, the judge was the person that could listen to all sides and then decide the right thing and then kind of end the argument. And I liked the idea of that. And then going into law school, I didn't know what sort of law I wanted to do, and for a while I thought I was going to go into corporate law because they're much bigger paychecks and it seems very fancy, and that's if you get good grades and do well, and I did. That's kind of where you're expected to go. And I spent my second summer out of law school at a big law firm doing that, and just found it to be horribly boring. I mean, there was a lot of money and it was a very nice office, but I just wasn't really motivated by it. And so in my third year of law school, one of my professors suggested that I take his family law class. And at the time, I thought, what am I going to do with this, right? But he thought I would be good. I didn't like it. And then as I started doing it, I found the stories of the actual cases because they involved, not that corporate law isn't real people, but like day-to-day families, and you learn about their stories and you get to help them in a very meaningful way. And then once I was out of school, I actually worked for him at his law firm. And from the first time that I had a case representing a mother who was going through a pretty messy divorce and had some kids and had been living very well, but then once her husband decided to make a different choice, she was really struggling with money and struggling with how to pay her bills and how to get groceries. And, I had argued a case to get her some immediate, it's called spousal support, to help her in child support. And I remember her calling me the day that the check for that came in and telling me that she just got a bunch of groceries and was able to get a pizza and run a movie with her kids and was thanking me so much. And it seems like a little thing, but like I in a small way, but a really real way, I had changed that family for the better. And that feeling and that gratitude just made me feel like, okay, I really want to do this. And so I did that for some time, but when you're in the court system as an attorney advocating for your client, especially when I would be representing people whose children they were worried were being abused or neglected, I would get very frustrated because I would go and argue these cases and try to explain to the judge that this is an emergency. We need to have a hearing tomorrow. But it wasn't up to me when we would have the hearing or when orders would be issued because I was just one side making an argument. And so I realized if I wanted things to move differently and to get better results or what I thought were better results for these kids who could be in danger, I would have to be the one sitting up there wearing the robe. And so it kind of came back around to when I was a little kid thinking, well, the judge is the one who gets to be in charge and really make things happen and settle these disputes. And so I saw an opportunity. I was in Cleveland in private practice then to come back to my hometown. I was raised here and to be a magistrate in domestic relations court, and that's family law. And so a magistrate is like a judge, but you are appointed, not elected. So you work for the judge because most judges, they have what's called a docket, so all of the cases. And there are so many of those, one person or two people can't realistically hear every single hearing. So you have magistrates who do a similar thing, and then the judge reviews your work. So I did that for about 10 years, and I loved it. But again, with my personality, thinking I could, I wanted to make some changes, I wanted to do things, I wanted to be the person in charge. When I saw an opportunity to run for judge, I did that. And so the first time I ran was actually for municipal court, which was not where my heart truly was, but there's still, they do a lot of important work there, and there is the domestic violence cases that are heard there. And I actually lost that race, which was very humbling, but one of the best things that could have happened to me, because I never thought, that I could get over such a failure when I tried so hard and didn't make it. But I did, and then after that, this spot came up, the juvenile probate judge, which is really where my heart was, because it's all about kids and families. And so I had to kind of pick myself back up and go for that spot, and I was able to get it. And so I've been there ever since. And so that's the story.
So you work in juvenile court.
Mm-hmm.
What is the most common mistake you see teens and make when it comes to the law?
Oh gosh. So it's complicated. So with juvenile court, it's they have what's called delinquency cases, and that's when kids are making some mistakes, and so we have to figure out how to get them back on the right track. So juvenile court is different from adult court because it's not just about punishment if you've done wrong, but really the focus is on rehabilitation. And that's also true for adult court, but in adult court, it is sometimes also just what's called punitive or about punishment and consequences. I still want to have consequences, but it's really about getting the kids on the right track. So as far as the question, what mistake kids make, they make all kinds of mistakes. Well, one of the biggest mistakes I see is, I remember being your ages, and middle school I think was one of the hardest times that I've ever had in my life, just because you guys are going through so many changes personally, and you're trying to figure out who you want to be, and trying to figure out what you want to do, and where do you belong, and you want to fit in, and everyone wants to fit in. And I see way too many kiddos who, in trying to fit in or trying to, be cool or, have fun in the moment and figure out their identity, they pick a peer group that may be fun to be around and make them feel good in the moment, but are making choices that could have long-lasting consequences. And I think for a lot of people, unfortunately lots of adults, but particularly children, you don't think about what those consequences could be. You're just kind of in the moment, and peer pressure is a real thing. And it's hard when you've got a group of people who are your friends and they're about to do something that you probably know is wrong or a bad idea. But you feel that pressure because they're your friends and you want them to still be your friends. And so even though you have that little voice in the back of your head saying, I shouldn't do this is a bad idea, you go along with it anyway. And the more you do that, maybe at first it's a small thing, but then that one, okay, you didn't get in trouble. So then you're going to make a bigger choice that's bad, and maybe another one, and then find themselves in situations that 2 years ago they never would have thought possible. And now they're really committing more serious crimes and feel kind of lost. But now those really are their friends. And so now what do? And they feel kind of stuck. So as far as the biggest mistake or the most frequent one, it's probably making those choices in the moment because you want to stay with your friends or that peer group, and so you can get talked into something, or because you want to stick out or be cool or be funny, you'll do something even though you kind of know this isn't the best choice, but feeling that pressure or that desire to be, cool or seen or part of this friend group, and they do it. But I mean, kids make lots of mistakes. Everybody makes lots of mistakes, but that's one of them.
So if you're able to tell us, what's the craziest,
Gosh. Well, now
They're interesting kids.
Yeah. So they're all interesting. So this is a little complicated because I can't speak about particular cases, especially in juvenile court, because we don't, a lot of that stuff is sealed because we want the kids who have made mistakes to have a chance to rehabilitate themselves, make better choices, and then not have that haunt them for the rest of their lives. As far as what I find to be the most interesting, they're all interesting because I love people and learning about people. And I mean, you guys do this podcast, so I'm going to guess you kind of like that too. You like hearing other people's stories. So I love that. Some of the best moments or more interesting ones is on the juvenile side when I have a really hard case. So I also hear what's called abuse, dependency, or neglect cases where parents or caregivers, for whatever reasons, for lots of reasons, either are not able to care for their child the way they should or are actively abusing them. If it's bad enough at some point, then Children's Services and the prosecutor will file what's called a motion for permanent custody, which means the parents have messed up so much, and as much help as we're trying to give them, they're not making the right choices. We have to terminate their parental rights forever, and so take that child away forever. Those cases are, you could call them interesting. They're also devastating and heartbreaking and very, very hard. But since I'm also the probate judge, and probate does a lot of things, but one of the things probate courts do is adoptions. So one of the most interesting and fun ones for me is after I've had a case like that where I had to permanently remove a child, and it's all very sad. But then I get to see that child on my adoption docket for my probate court because they've found either a foster family or other people who love them so much and want them to be permanently a part of their family that they want to adopt them. And so seeing those kiddos go through such a terrible start in life and then find a forever family that wants to permanently adopt them, take them into their home, and raise them, and become their new family, and seeing how happy those kids are to be wanted and cared for and loved, and to see how happy I get to make those families who get to then have that child join them, is a really cool, full circle moment. So those are some of the best ones. Yeah.
How do you decide the punishments for juveniles and quite depending on case by case, how do you make up what the punishment is?
Well, so it depends. So we have a lot of rules we have to follow, a lot of laws. And so depending on what the juvenile did, some of that stuff is, not up to me at a certain point as far as what the consequences are going to be, because it depends on what charges the prosecutor's office decides to bring against the juvenile. So whatever they're being charged with, if they have committed that act, then the different consequences kind of change. But Broadwith, when I look at a child, how many times have they messed up? What has happened? I talk about I like to use carrots and sticks. So if you've ever heard that expression, carrots are kind of like treats or rewards, right? And sticks are kind of like, consequences, bad things they don't want to have happen. So I love to use carrots when I can, but I use sticks when I have to. And so depending on, I try to use a combination of that. But the more, a stick that didn't work the first time, then I got to get a bigger one and have more and more consequences. So I'm looking at the whole picture about where did that child come from? What have they dealt with? Do they have special needs? Do they have mental health issues? What was the circumstances that caused the child to make those choices? Because a lot of times it's very, very complicated. You don't usually see a kid who's making some really bad choices that haven't come from some really unfortunate circumstances. So I try to look at a combination of that to figure out, how do I get this child back on track? How do I rehabilitate them? The younger they are, when I see them, the more able I am to get that change to happen sooner. Whereas if they are a repeat offender and keep coming back, I have to think about that. But my guiding light always, and I say this, is when I'm looking at a child who has done something, I have to ensure the safety for the child, for their family, and for the community at large. And so if I can't ensure those three things, that's going to be a situation where I have to incarcerate them. I have to, we call it detainment. I have to detain them. Because if I can't be sure that they're going to be safe if they're out, or their family's not going to be safe, or their community, then there's going to be much harsher punishments. Just not because I want to make them feel bad. I want them to get better, but I owe a duty not just to them, but also to the entire community and the people that elected me. And so I have to do what I have to do to make sure everybody's safe. So I think about those things.
How much of Hollywood court is reality?
I mean, so we have trials, and when you see the two people on either side on the two different tables, that's all real. Me sitting up there in my robe, that's real. The thing is, any sort of Hollywood stuff, to make it exciting and fun, they like to have these big gotcha moments, right? Where there's like a surprise witness that's brought in and nobody expected to see them. Or there's this piece of evidence that's really going to convict them and nobody saw it coming from the other side. That doesn't really happen. It shouldn't happen. Because, we want there to be justice. We want it to be fair for everybody. And so in having that fairness, we want to make sure everybody has a full opportunity to know, if you're the person who is the defendant and the juvenile, then to know what evidence is being lodged against you so you can prepare to have a rebuttal. And vice versa, for the person who is being charged with something, the prosecution needs to have an opportunity to know, well, what are their defenses so they can come up with their best arguments, or if the defenses are good enough so they can say, oh, we got the wrong person, we need to look somewhere else. So this idea that there are these huge surprises in court shouldn't happen and almost never do, because we set out rules about when you have to do what's called an exhibit list, where you send to the other side, here's everything I'm going to use, so they can look at it, review it, and prepare. And same thing for witnesses. So we want the sides to tell each other, here are the people I'm going to call, and here's why. So you don't get a lot of those moments in real life. Yeah.
Did you ever have a case where you couldn't make a decision?
Well, no, because it's my job and I have to make a decision. But I absolutely have had cases. I mean, I take all of these cases very, very seriously. Anybody who has my job certainly should. They weigh on me. Sometimes it's very clear what the right thing is to do, and sometimes it's very complicated and it's not as clear. And so those are the most difficult ones where, I have to kind of come back to it, look at everything again, do some other cases, write some other entries or decisions, and then go back and kind of take another look at it to see how I feel. Because I'm a person, and I can get emotionally wrapped up and invested, and you have to learn how to set that aside, because it's really not about me, it's about, applying the law to the facts that were presented and then coming up with what that result is. And so I definitely struggle, but I can't say there's been something where I just can't make a choice because I don't have that option. I have to make a choice.
How long do you think each case is on average?
So it totally depends. I mean, I have traffic court, which some of your peers, if not now, though you're going to know they come to see me. In those cases, I'll do a bunch at a time, and so each one of those might be 5 or 10 minutes, right? But then some cases could be trials that last, 5 days, depending on what it is. So as far as how long it would take to actually hear the evidence, it depends on the complexity of the case, how many witnesses are going to be called, making sure everybody's available. And then if something new happens during the course of the trial, sometimes they need even more time. So as far as, how long it takes, it varies wildly on the type of case. So a lot of them would be 10, 15 minutes, an hour, 2 hours for a hearing, and some could be days. I mean, and the case itself could go on for months and months and months, because it's not like they file something and you have your trial. There are certain things that happen at first. So there's many stages where they might come back to court and we see how things are going while everybody's preparing. And I'm issuing temporary orders during that time. And then you get to the final trial. So it depends.
What are some pros and cons of being a judge?
So, I mean, the biggest pros are probably also some of the biggest cons. I love having the ability to be able to help people and do what I think is necessary within the confines of the law, and to be able to make those choices swiftly. So being able to have that power feels very, very good, because I remember when I was the attorney arguing, worrying that a child is being abused, and then depending on the courts, some of them are so busy and their dockets are so busy that maybe I would wait, 2 months to have a hearing. Whereas now, if I'm looking at something and I'm worried that a child is immediately in danger, I can issue an order and say, I want everybody here, as soon as possible, sometimes the same day, or issue what's called an ex parte order. Which means before I even hear the other side, it's such an extreme emergency, I can put kind of Band-Aids on and issue emergency temporary orders and then bring them all back. And so it is a pro and a privilege to be able to do those things. The cons, though, are those sorts of situations are terribly hard and sad to think about. I'm a mom, and, children are some of the most vulnerable people in our community on the probate side, which is a whole different, it's a different area, but it also involves people who are very vulnerable, older people who might be being abused, people who have mental health issues or special needs who might be being neglected. So all of that's very weighty stuff, and I am a person. And so the pros are I get to help them in a very real and meaningful way, but the cons are sometimes whatever I'm trying to do to help, I know at the back of my mind, this is not going to be as much. I'm not going to be able to give them back what was taken from them or make them whole again in the way that I would like to. And those stories stay with me because I'm a person. And so it does take a toll, when we're in these jobs, because you can't see what some of these kiddos have been through and not remember them and, have your heart ache for them, and I don't forget about them. So being able to figure out how to strike that work-life balance, and not become completely paranoid and so strict that I never want my own kids to leave the house, right? That's a constant struggle and a juggling act to let them have freedom, but because of everything that I've seen, to know what can happen if they have too much and trying to work all of that out. Yeah.
I have some questions
Yeah.
just in case. So you kind of talked a little bit about this. How has working as a juvenile court judge, if it has, changed your perspective of children? I remember you talked a little bit about giving too much freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Has who they are as people changed? Your thought really changed in your mind?
So I think that it's really driven home for me just how much we are shaped from our families and our circumstances, and recognizing that, just how different people live their lives. And so, hopefully you all are in very safe homes with parents who love you, and but it's really brought home how many kids we have that don't have that start in life. And so it's caused me to feel a lot of gratitude for the good parents that are out there. But it's also been a big wake-up call about just how some kiddos and how some families are living day to day. And that has really spurred on even more of my passion to want to stay in this job and do whatever I can to try to help our community at large, to make sure whatever resources I can have available for these families and for these kids to help them earlier and sooner, so that, when you have a child who's struggling and they're in first grade, second grade, you don't wait until they're, juniors to try to figure out how to get them on the right track. Because the older they get and the more they're having that lived experience without help, the harder it is to give them that chance and to get them back on the right track. So that has been a big realization for me. Yeah.
What was the most amount of times you've seen somebody reoccur in court?
Oh gosh, I mean, well, you know, we call those frequent flyers. So we have we unfortunately, you know, we have generations of families who, you know, we could have had this before my time, you know, kids who were in trouble and had issues, and then they've grown up, have not been able to find a better way, and now they're having their own kids, and we're starting to see those kids in the system because they were never probably parented themselves. They never really learned how to be a parent. And so they're passing down a lot of those bad choices to their kids, and you see that, right? So you see some of these kids, you'll see them when they're young, and then they just keep coming back and keep coming back, and the charges get worse and worse, which can be very frustrating. But you know, the good news is, and what I try to focus on is, I may not be able to save every kid, but I can save some of them. I can save a lot of them. And for me, you know, the ones that I save are more than enough and make my job more than enough to be able to get up and do it again, because I'm always thinking about them and the ones that I can help, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, what do you guys, I mean, what else? Any of you interested in being a lawyer, or?
I've thought about being a lawyer a little bit,
Yeah. There's a lot you can do with the law. And there's a lot of ways to help people. You don't have to be a lawyer or a judge to do it. But I would encourage all of you to think about ways in which you can help your community.
Yeah.
Anything else?
So this is election year for you, right?
It is. And I have an opponent.
What does that look like as
Mhm.
like having an election?
Yeah, so anybody who is an elected official will tell you, as much as we are grateful for voters and getting those votes and having people elect us in these positions, I don't know many people who go into something where you are elected because you just love the politicking part of it, right? I love going out and meeting people, talking to people what I do, getting them excited about what we're doing at the court. But there's a lot that goes along with that. And so certainly in an election year, there's going to be a lot more times that, you know, maybe otherwise I would have been able to spend that time at home with my kiddos or relaxing or doing something. And instead, I'm going to be going to events and trying to meet the community and trying to make sure people know who I am and what I do. So the schedule gets a whole lot busier. Because, you know, like during parade season, I try to do as many of those as I can. In an election year, I'm going to try to make it to every single one, right? A lot of the political events, I like to be supportive and to go to those things, and I certainly do all the time. But in an election year, again, I want to try to make sure I make it to every single one. And, you know, to get elected, fortunately or unfortunately, it's not just about who's the best candidate. It's about things like name recognition, making sure the public knows who you are. All of that costs money. Money and time. And so raising money and making sure people understand that, you know, I need contributions to be able to get my name out there. People who are excited about what I do for the court, so I can spread that message so they know all the things we're doing at the court. You know, all of that takes time, money, and resources. And so an election year looks very different because I'm just a heck of a lot busier, but for the good and the bad.
Yeah.
So, I would assume you have like off days. Like, how does your schedule usually work?
I mean, in some ways I don't really, to tell you the truth. So I have days that I have a full docket. Yesterday I had maybe 10 cases and I didn't have a lunch because at lunch I was meeting with my staff attorney, and then, you know, even when I have a break, I might be meeting with officers to sign search warrants. But especially with this area of the law, there can be emergencies that happen at any time. I could get a call at 1 a.m. because I needed to meet with a detective and sign a warrant, or because, you know, they found a child who's in a circumstance where they need to have an emergency order issued. So I'm always on call for those things. But I try to schedule breaks, and we try to build into the docket time where I'm not actually sitting up on the bench. A lot of people, when they think about what a judge does, you just picture me up in that robe, right? People come into court and I issue decisions. But there's so much more that goes into that, particularly with my role, because it's a single judge court and I'm running 2 courts. There's also a lot of administrative stuff that I do because it's a big court. I have almost 70 employees. I have 2 different buildings. And so just, you know, hiring people, managing people, that takes up all of the off time, right? But we try to schedule it in.
Okay. Yeah. So that was the bell. What would be one last word of advice you'd give to all 8th graders, 7th graders, 6th graders listening to
Well, first of all, listen to that inner voice. Even if you're feeling pressured to make a choice that wouldn't be good or wouldn't be safe, try to listen to that inner voice, because we all have it. Where if something's saying that this is off, this isn't safe, I shouldn't do it, don't do it. And try to remember and realize that all of this, all of the stuff that you have going on socially. Not that it's not important, but this is just a snapshot in your lives. You've got the whole rest of your lives to lead. You do not need to have it all figured out, but making the right choices now, paying attention in class, studying, obviously stay the heck away from drugs, alcohol, all that nonsense, right? And just try to day-to-day focus on you and being a good person for you and making good choices for you and not worrying so much about what other people are going to think about that. Because if it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do. And you will be proud of yourself and happy that you made that right choice in the moment, even if it's a very hard choice when you're making it.
You're good. Thank you for being on the
Thanks
show.
for having me anytime.
Welcome.
It was nice meeting the three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adios, amigos.